April 1940. In the shadow of World War II, deep inside the forests of the Soviet Union, the secret police began one of the most horrific operations of the war. Thousands of captured Polish officers, priests, intellectuals, and civil servants, taken prisoner after the Soviet invasion of eastern Poland in September 1939, were ordered to leave their prison camps under the pretense of relocation. Blindfolded and bound, they were led into secluded woods near the towns of Katyn, Kalinin, and Kharkiv, where freshly dug pits awaited them. One by one, they were shot in the back of the head and buried in mass graves. These coordinated killings would later be known as the Katyn Massacre. More than 22,000 Polish citizens were murdered in cold blood. For years, the forests remained silent, hiding the truth beneath the soil, but this crime would not stay hidden forever. The pact that sealed Poland's fate. On August 23, 1939, Germany and the Soviet Union signed the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, a so-called non-aggression treaty. Secretly, it divided Eastern Europe into zones of influence. Germany would take the West, and the Soviet Union would take the East. This pact condemned Poland before the war even began. Just days later, on September 1, 1939, Nazi Germany invaded Poland, triggering the Second World War. Polish forces fought bravely, but they were overwhelmed. Then, on September 17, a second blow came when the Soviet Red Army invaded from the east. Stalin claimed he was protecting the Polish people, but in reality, he was fulfilling his deal with Hitler. By early October, Poland had fallen. Germany occupied the West, and the Soviets controlled the East. The Polish state ceased to exist, and its people entered an era of fear, repression, and occupation. Prisoners of the Soviet state. After the invasion, between 240,000 and 250,000 Polish soldiers and civilians were captured by the Red Army, including around 10,000 officers. They were handed over to the NKVD, the Soviet secret police, and labeled as enemies of the state. 3 main prison camps were established. Kozylsk and Starobelsk held officers, intellectuals, and officials. Ostashkov held border guards, policemen, and other uniformed services. By late November 1939, more than 14,500 Polish prisoners were confined in these camps under brutal conditions. Overcrowded barracks, hunger, and relentless interrogations created an atmosphere of fear and despair. Despite months of propaganda, most Poles refused to cooperate. They stayed loyal to their country and faith. In March 1940, NKVD chief Lavrentiy Beria sent a secret memorandum to Joseph Stalin, describing the prisoners as hardened and unrepentant enemies and recommending their execution. Stalin approved immediately. The order was signed by Stalin, Molotov, Voroshilov, Mikoyan, Kalinin, and Kaganovich, the highest ranks of Soviet power. The killings begin. The executions began in April 1940. A 3-man NKVD committee, Vsevolod Merkulov, Bogdan Kobylov, and Leonid Bashtakov, oversaw the operation. Their mission: create death lists, sign execution orders, and keep everything secret. At night, prisoners were taken from their cells, told they were being transferred, and led into soundproof rooms. There, they were identified, handcuffed, and shot in the back of the head. The killer was often Vasily Blokhin, the NKVD's chief executioner. Blokhin wore a leather apron, gloves, and cap to protect himself from blood. Using a German-made Walther pistol, he executed up to 300 men per night at the Ostashkov camp. Bodies were dragged out, loaded into trucks, and buried in pits near villages like Mednoy. For almost a month, Blokhin and his team killed continuously, 1 man every 3 minutes. By the end, over 22,000 Poles were dead. For his service, Blokhin received the Order of the Red Banner. His personal tally of over 7,000 executions remains the most ever committed by one individual. The discovery and Soviet lies. On June 22, 1941, Germany invaded the Soviet Union. 2 years later, in February 1943, German forces discovered the mass graves in the Katyn Forest near Smolensk. They invited international experts and journalists to witness the exhumations, finding thousands of Polish officers still in uniform. Documents dated to the spring of 1940 proved the Soviets had committed the killings. The Polish government in exile demanded an investigation by the International Red Cross, but Stalin's regime reacted with rage, cutting off relations with Poland and blaming the Germans. Soviet propaganda labeled it a fascist lie. For nearly 50 years, Moscow maintained this false narrative. Even during the Nuremberg trials, the Soviets tried to blame the Nazis, but the evidence was too weak, and the case was dropped. the truth slowly emerges. The Katyn Massacre remained one of the Soviet Union's most tightly guarded secrets for decades. Most of the perpetrators lived freely, but some eventually faced justice. Lavrentiy Beria, who ordered the killings, was executed in 1953. Merkulov and Kobylov met the same fate. Vasily Blokhin, stripped of his rank during Khrushchev's reforms, died by suicide in 1955. But most NKVD officers who took part in the killings were never punished. Only in 1990 did Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev finally admit that the NKVD, under Stalin's orders, had committed the massacre. 2 years later, Boris Yeltsin released secret Politburo documents confirming full Soviet responsibility. The truth was finally out. Legacy and memory. During World War II, around 6 million Polish citizens were killed, soldiers, Jews, and civilians alike, under both Nazi and Soviet terror. Despite unimaginable loss, the spirit of Poland survived. The memory of Katyn stands as a symbol of truth rising above decades of lies.